Want to show your support for your Philly teams? Check out PhillyGoat.com. They have all of your needs covered, whether it's Sixers, Flyers, Eagles, Phillies, Union, Philly boxing, Philly culture, or Philly pride. There's something for you. Tees, hoodies, hats, any color you want, any size you want, including kids. Go to PhillyGoat.com. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order. That's PhillyGoat.com. Be sure it has the authentic goat on the sleeve, and use that promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off of your order. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane. I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. Welcome. I'm so glad you could be here with us this week. I know there's some new listeners out there, so if you are new, welcome. This is Back to the Future. We like to take deep dives into the history of Philly sports and just examine them the way any Philly sports fans would. Typically, this is what we would do if you were hanging out at the bar with some friends or tailgating and just bullshitting about what's going on. So be sure to like and subscribe since you're here. All of those things help the algorithm out as we're trying to grow this thing. But again, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. All right, one thing before we get into today's episode I wanted to talk about, and I didn't realize this until I started doing some research on some possible show ideas and interviews that are coming up on the horizon, but the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame is actually celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and very cool organization. Definitely check out their website and see what they have to offer. But what they're doing now, leading up to the induction ceremony in November, is they're basically doing a 20 for 20. I guess this year they have an inductee that represents their 20th different sport that's in the Hall of Fame. So there's people from 20 different sports, just a ton of people. If you go through the list, there's so many. So basically, this is like the perfect sort of tie-in to a podcast like this because Philly has such a rich sports history, not only our teams, but people from this area that have gone on to do great things. So anyway, they're doing the 20 for 20 to celebrate not only the 20th anniversary, but 20 sports being represented. Like I mentioned, working on some things with them, so stay tuned for that. They're highlighting the best of the best for specific categories as we lead up to that induction in November. So what I'm going to do is just spotlight some of those as we go through Back to the Future. So far, they've done mentors and Olympia. Obviously, that's the top coaches and managers, and then the Olympic legends from Philly. Many of these people we have highlighted or talked about as I'm going through the list. So just some of the managers and coaches that we've highlighted. We've talked about Kathy Rush, Dawn Staley, Herb McGee, Greasy Neal, John Chaney, Teresa Grench, Tina Sloan Green, either on this podcast or the Daily This Day in Philly Sports History, which, by the way, check that out, like and subscribe to it. It's a daily podcast, roughly 8 to 15 minutes a day just on what happened that day. But we've done a lot of those coaches one way or the other, whether it was for Black history, women's history, or just whatever they've done that day. But it's just the list goes on. And to go through and see the list of not only folks that made an impact in Philly for the Philly teams, like a John Chaney or Kathy Rush or Herb McGee, but the people that are from Philadelphia that have made an impact. I mean, Dawn Staley could fit into both categories. Gino Auriemma is from the area. So it's very cool to go and see the accolades. So go to their website and check that out. It is PhiladelphiaSportsHallOfFame.org. It gives a full list of the coaches and what their accomplishments were. But the sports that we've talked about for these coaches too, I mean, field hockey, the NBA, NCAA, men's and women's, Major League Baseball, women's lacrosse, the NHL, NFL, track and field. We've talked about so many of these sports, and so it's, like I said, it's a good segue, good partnership that I'm working on some things to team up with them in the future for some things. But definitely go to the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame.org for that full list. There's definitely some good people over there. Like I said, stay tuned for more with them. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about the Olympic heroes from the Philadelphia area. But just, I mean, the coaches is just insane. And then, I mean, even if you go to like an Andy Reid, who coached in Philly, who's not in the Hall of Fame yet, I mean, you have to imagine that he's going to be someday. And I mean, Charlie Manuel's in there, and I didn't even mention him. But I mean, he's not from Philly, but he made such an impact on the sports world here. So be sure to go check them out. It's definitely a great organization, and I will have more on them as we get closer to that induction date in November. Speaking of partnerships too, I mentioned this last week, but we have a specific or a brand new member or partnership with 2008 Phils, and what they do is they run the world's biggest Phillies email newsletter, and it's a must read for every Philly fan. I check it out every week, sometimes multiple times a week, especially if I'm looking for ideas for this day in Philly sports history. But they're great people over there. The site is just phenomenal, and right now for a limited time they're offering a 75% off subscription for Back to the Future listeners. So wherever you're getting this, whether it's on YouTube, you're listening through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever, in the description, I will have a specific link they've given us for Back to the Future listeners. Click that link, go get your 75% off for your subscription. Excuse me. What a subscription gets you is access to all of their content, all of their posts, the entire archives, the community chats, the discussion boards, lots of good discussions and debates going on there. Like I said, a lot of these things that we do on this podcast. You also get a 2008 Phillies championship banner t-shirt. The 2008 Phil's Twitter account will follow your Twitter account if you want. Plus, you get access to all kinds of Phillies giveaways, tickets, autographs, memorabilia, all of that stuff. And it's only $2 a month. If you follow that link below, 75% off for Back to the Future listeners, $2 a month, or hell, just pay $20 for the entire year. I mean, at that point, it's worth it for the t-shirt alone, and then you get all the content on the website. And I mean, and the content, like I said, is great content. So check out 2008 Phils. It's the world's biggest Phillies email newsletter. Follow the link below for an exclusive 75% off deal. Excuse me. For Back to the Future listeners. And as I always say, I stand by what I put out there. I'm not going to tell you to go do something without me believing in it too. I'm a subscriber. I have the t-shirt. I read it regularly. It comes right to your email. And then, like I said, it's like a rabbit hole. You jump down it. Like once you go check out the current articles, next thing you know, you're searching this, you're checking this out, you're posting a discussion on the discussion board. So go check it out. It's $20. $20 for a full year. 75% off only by clicking that link below, exclusively for Back to the Future listeners. All right, so sticking with the whole 2008 Phils theme, by the way, how's that for a segue? I'm going to go into some pre-2008 Phillies, I guess. And everybody knows that 2007 to 2011 was the golden era of Phillies baseball. And, I mean, it's only because it was a short, compacted time. I mean, you could argue that the 76 through 83 may have been the golden era, but the 07 through 2011, people pretty much say because they won 5 divisions in a row, 2 pennants, won the 1 title, it's the golden era of Phillies baseball. But how did they get there? And a lot of times, and especially with the things that are going on with the Sixers over the past few years, especially this offseason, the leading up to that, there was a ton of frustration with the Phillies teams. And I'm talking from like 2001 to 2006. They were hands down one of the most frustrating teams I've had to deal with. And that's even more so than what the Eagles during the same time frame were, only because at least the Eagles did make it to the playoffs and win some playoff games and go to a Super Bowl. This team never made the playoffs, yet they were so close so many times. Before we get into that, we need to take a step back to 2000. And in 2000, that was Terry Francona's last year. They went 65 and 70 or 65 and 97, and they started off in last place, and they pretty much were in last place all year. Now, Terry Francona, you're going to see, not a fan of Terry Francona. I think he's a fraud. Yes, he's a two-time World Series champion, but I can't stand him, and I'll get more into him and why that's there should be an asterisk next to that two-time champion title that he gets to have, but more on that later. I can't stand him. So obviously he got fired. He went 97 losses. And Larry Brown, wrong LB. Larry Bowa took over as manager in 2001 and immediately took basically the same team and won 86 games with them. They almost won the division. They were 2 games back of the Braves, 7 out of the wild card. They were in first place as late as September 1st, and they just couldn't get over the hump. No harm, no foul. I mean, they lost 97 games the year before. Larry Bowa came in and won 86 with them. I mean, that's what, a 21 game turnaround in 1 year. The following year, they took a little bit of a step back, went 80 and 81, finished over 20 games out of first place, didn't come close in the wild card. They were like 15, but they would go on quite the run after this season. This would be their last losing season until 2012, I believe it was. And this was the season they traded Scott Rowland because he questioned what the team was doing and things like that. And it sort of was like a watermark or a turning point for this team because they traded Rowland, and it's a shame because Scott Rowland's going into the Hall of Fame this year, and they traded Rowland because he wasn't going to sign a long-term contract because he didn't necessarily think the Phils were committed to winning. They did play like a small market club. If I had $1 for every time I heard somebody in the newspaper, on the news, on sports talk radio, whatever, say the Phillies are acting like they're a small market club, I would have had enough to sign free agents for the Phillies. But ironically enough, they traded him, and then in 2003, they actually started to spend because Citizens Bank Park was opening up in 2004. So Jim Thome was the big signing in 2003 and was basically going to be the face of the organization to open up the new ballpark. In 2003, they went 86 and 76, 15 games behind the Braves again. 5 back of the Marlins, who got hot. They were in it with the Marlins. They were going back and forth with them, and the Marlins pulled away late. The Marlins ended up obviously getting hot and won the World Series in 2003. But this is the last season of the vet. They're moving into the new park. Jim Thome was there. Things were feeling pretty good. So in 2004, once again, they went 86 and 76, 10 games back of the Braves, 6 back in the wild card, and they just couldn't get over the hump. Larry Bowa was fired, and they ended the season as the first. Or Bowa was fired at the end of the season. They were in first place at the All-Star break, so it's not like this team was far off. It's just Larry Bowa could not get them over the hump. He was fired for the last 2 games. I believe it was Gary Varsho took over for him, and I don't even remember what he did the last couple games. But so you got Charlie Manuel coming in now as the manager. You have the new ballpark, and then you have a lot of what are, I would say, core of the team. A lot of them were in place. So 2005, Charlie Manuel wins 2 more games. They go 88 and 74. 2 games back of the Braves. They were battling with them all season, even in September. It was the first year in a long time where we had like a legitimate playoff pennant feel to it. Some of those other teams with Bowa, they were in it, but they weren't close. I mean, that in 2005, the Phillies finished 2 games back of the Braves, 1 game back of, I believe it was the Astros in the wild card. and they were right there. So again, all Charlie Manuel turned a lot of the naysayers wrong. I remember everybody said he was a bumbling idiot and things like that, but he turned that team around in 2005. They almost knocked off the Braves. They were almost made it to the wild card, and they just could not necessarily get over the hump. So again, you go into 2006, you're thinking you have high hopes. They took a little bit of a step back. They went 85-77, 12 games behind the Braves, 3 games out of the wild card. But that going into that season, they traded Jim Thome because Ryan Howard was killing it down in Reading and Scranton Wilkes-Barre. So they needed a place to have him. Thome was old, Howard was young. So Howard won the Rookie of the Year. Bobby Abreu was traded at the All-Star break to the Dodgers that year, or right after the All-Star break to the Dodgers. And then the Phillies had a great second half run after they traded him and sort of set the tone for 2007, giving Jimmy Rollins the whole ability to say, we're the team to beat. So, I mean, if you think about it, from 2001 to 2006, they won 86, 80, 86, 86, 88, 85 games. They were right there. They were on the cusp. They just couldn't get over the hump. It was like they were in that. This would be like the equivalent of Major League Baseball purgatory, where they're almost there. They're fighting and they just can't get there. So imagine this going on while at the same time the Eagles are struggling they get to the NFC Championship game and they can't get over. So a lot of similarities between the teams and a lot of frustration to be a Philly fan during this time. But sticking specifically with these Phils, the 01 to 06 Phils, what was the issue? Was it the offense? I mean, they scored runs, and I mean, they had guys that were all-stars and solid players. Mike Lieberthal, Pat Burrell, who became one of the catalysts for that 08 team. He had a couple big hits in the World Series. Scott Rowland, who's a Hall of Famer. Bobby Abreu, who's a borderline Hall of Famer. Doug Glanville, who's solid. Rico Brogna, who was an all-star. Jimmy Rollins, who probably will be in the Hall of Fame. Jim Thome, who's in the Hall of Fame. David Bell, who's a solid player. Aaron Rowand, who did what you had to do. Utley, who's not quite a Hall of Famer, but a great player. Ryan Howard, who's a great player. Placido Polanco, who was an all-star. Marlon Byrd, who was an all-star. Ricky Leday, who I believe was an all-star. Travis Lee, Marlon Anderson, Johnny Estrada, who went on to be an all-star. They had guys. So I don't necessarily think it was the offense. I mean, some of those guys aren't going to be first ballot Hall of Famers, but I mean, a guy like Mike Lieberthal was just a solid, good guy. Like, he could hit. Didn't necessarily hit that much for power, but I mean, he got the job done. He was a decent catcher. I mean, starting pitching, maybe you could make the argument that they never had sort of that shut down number one guy. Randy Wolf was the ace a lot of those years. Brandon Duckworth just never panned out. Robert Person was solid, but he was never a number one. Omar Dahl, Bruce Chen, Vicente Padilla, Brett Myers, Kevin Millwood, who was disappointing, who came over. Had Millwood been better on these teams, maybe they would have maybe had a chance to win something. He was coming off of basically a Cy Young, being on that Braves rotation with Glavine and Maddox and Avery and Smoltz. Actually, I don't know if Avery was on the team, but Smoltz. And then didn't do anything with the Phillies, left to go, I believe it was like Minnesota or some team in the AL Central, could have been Cleveland, and led the league in ERA the next year. Eric Milton, John Lieber, Corey Lytle, they had guys. They just never had a legitimate number one starter. So they had solid starting pitching, but they didn't have a true ace. The bullpen was pretty solid, I must say. They have Ricky Bottalico, Jose Mesa, who's still one of the top relievers in Phillies history, Real Cormier, same thing, Carlos Silva, Dan Plesac, a young Ryan Matson, Terry Adams, Billy Wagner, Tim Worrell, Armory Telemaco, Ugith Urbina before he got the murder charges, Jeff Geary, a young Cole Hamels, a younger Jamie Moyer, Tom Gordon, and Arthur Rhodes. And Moyer came in late. I should have had him with the starters, but he wasn't there until like '06. And Hamels actually, I believe, started off in the bullpen. So, I mean, they had a decent bullpen. I think it was the starting pitching could have been a little bit better, but I think offensively they were there. Was it the manager? I mean, throw Francona out. I mean, he was only there for the 1 year, 2000. He kind of was the one that did this. But all right, you're going to get me to say it now. I hate Francona. He's overrated. One, I don't care if he won 2 World Series. He was put that first year, he was put into a ready-made situation. And don't give me the bullshit about the Red Sox curse, this, that, or the other. That team was on the brink. The year before, they won 95 games and were in the ALCS. So it's not like he came in and did what Bowa did and did a 21-game turnaround. Like that team was in the ALCS the year before. Yes, they were down 3-1 or whatever it was to the Yankees and had that great comeback in '04, but stop it. Like, they were in the ALCS the year before. And here comes Tito Francona. Look at me. I'm going to win a World Series, you scumbag. And even more so, from 95 to '04, they had one losing season and made the playoffs four times. So don't tell me Terry Francona is like Casey Stengel or Connie Mack. Like, dude's a jerk, first of all. He was part of the reason, I'll get into that in a minute, of why the Phillies can never get over the hump. So don't tell me Tito Francona is the man. No, he stepped into a great situation. He's overrated. There, I said it. Was it Larry Bowa? I think he was tough on his players. At times, it might have been too much, especially because they had a lot of young guys on that team. But it's hard to put a lot on him because he turned them around 21 games. They lost 97 games the year before he was there, and then he took them to 86 the next, or 186 the next. So I think he, with especially him and Jimmy going at it, once he got a couple years, it did sort of grow old. I heard that like the same thing happens sometimes in the NFL. Like I remember Ray Rhodes was very tough. He cursed at his players and challenged them, this, that, and the other. I think it just grew old. And then Charlie Manuel came in and finally was able to turn it around. And so I don't know if it was the manager. Bowa did well. Manuel did well. Was it the culture? And I think here is where we're on to something. And the only reason I'm saying this is here, listen to the culture of this team. From 1974 to 1986, the Phillies had one losing season, one season where they were 500, and 6 playoff appearances. They went to 2 World Series and won 1. From 1987 to 2000 then. One winning season, which was 1993, which was more of an anomaly than anything. As beloved as that team was, we could have a whole discussion and another episode on that. That was a strict anomaly. Every single person on that team overachieved that season. So I don't know. It was like the perfect storm. I love that team. One of my favorite teams ever growing up. But that was an anomaly, especially since it was the only winning season they had in 13 years. And 6 of those seasons, they had 90 losses. And for those of you scoring at home, Mr. Hall of Fame Casey Stengel, Tito Francona, he averaged 90 losses in his 4 seasons in the Phillies. So get the fuck out of here with, oh, Terry Francona is great. No. And I think that culture thing may have been part of what helped do Larry Bowa in, because he was used to that winning tradition, that winning culture. He was there for most of that run in 74 through 86. I think he left it after the World Series year in 83. So that probably was hard for him and probably upped the anxiety level, and like he already had a fiery temper, so it probably upped that somewhat. And I think you needed a guy like Charlie Manuel to come in and establish a winning culture, and that's why it took him 3 years to turn it around. He had the players, but you had '05 where it was just they couldn't get over that hump. '06. Again, they finished 3 games back in the wild card, but they couldn't get over the hump. And I think he was a good combination of Bowa and Tito, where he was a player's manager, but he also had control and was tough on the players when he needed. He knew what buttons to push for what guys, and I think that's what you needed. And I think there is a comparison to be made here with what's going on with the Sixers, because one of the things Doc Rivers said after he was fired, he was on a podcast and he was saying that there's a losing stench in that building, a losing culture. And I think that's what happened with the Phillies. I mean, Larry Bowa probably should have gone to the playoffs at least once in his time as manager, but because the stench of losing for so many years was there, he couldn't get over the hump, and you needed the right guy to get them over the hump. So obviously Doc Rivers, they thought, was that guy to get the Sixers over the hump. Obviously he didn't, and the stench is still there. Charlie Manuel got the stench out of the building, so to speak, and got them where they needed to be. Now, all the talk of the Sixers' new stadium, does that mean they need to get out of the building and go down to Chinatown? I don't know. Is Nick Nurse the guy to do it? I don't know, but somebody needs to come in and get rid of the losing stench with the Sixers, very much so like Charlie Manuel did. Because I don't think, and again, Doc Rivers, say what you want about him, and I don't want to turn this into a Sixers pod, but say what you want, he was who he was. He just wasn't the guy to get the stench out of the building. Larry Bowa was who he was. He was a damn good manager. Probably would have won if he'd have taken over the team in maybe 2010, 2011. Well, players were different then, so maybe Ruben ruined our farm system. But if he would have been the guy that took over for Joe Girardi, say, he may have been able to get the same thing that Rob Thompson did out of him. So you need the right guy for the job. And Charlie Manuel was the right guy to finally break whatever was going on with the Phillies from 01 to 06, that losing stench, that losing culture. Is Nick Nurse the guy to do it for the Sixers? Let's hope. So really, what was it? And it probably was a combination of everything. They were trying to get the right players. They missed on like Kevin Millwood, but they were starting to have the right guys, the right core players come in. Ryan Matson, Brett Myers, Pat Burrell, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Ryan Howard. They made the right decision with Shane Victorino and Jason Worth and guys like this. But they could just never put it together, and I think it comes down to the culture. They just had a losing culture, so much like we talked about the '64 Phillies, where once they got on it snowballed, they knew they were going to lose. It was just a matter of how they were going to lose. I think a lot of that happened with the 01 to 06 Phillies. They knew, okay, we're going to come so close, and then we're gonna fall short. And a couple of those times they finished a couple games back of the Braves, but the Braves won every single division and every NL East title since they joined the division. The first year would have been 1995, 95, because 94 was the strike year. 95 through 2005, they won the division every time. So, I mean, that definitely did not help where you have a team, and look at them now. They're still dominant. They have a winning culture. And I think that's what doomed the Phillies, not only for that time, but if you look back historically, the Phillies have a losing stench on them in general. It wasn't until relatively recently, the past 40, 50 years, if you go back to like the mid-'70s, that for the most part, the Phillies have been a winning organization. And I think, I don't know. And I think that plays a lot into it. So you need to be very cautious with who you bring in and how you do it. So hopefully Daryl Morey and Elton Brand are listening to this and paying attention. Hopefully Nick Nurse is the right guy. And especially with all the stuff that's going on this week with Joe, who knows? But that's what it is. So what do you think? Why couldn't the 01 to 06 Phillies get over the hump? I'm telling you, to me, it was the culture that Tito Francona, everybody's favorite hero in Boston, just left his stench on Philly and then went to a ready-made World Series. Get the hell out of here with that. All right. Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast, Back to the Future with a PH. Tell your friends, leave a review, spread the word. Let's help grow this. I mentioned it a few times, but make sure you're listening to This Day in Philly Sports History every day. This month of June, we've been speaking of losing stench and losing culture. We've been doing the Philly Sports Most Lovable Loser Tournament, where we took the teams that made the playoffs, just couldn't get the job done, put them in regions by sport, and we're trying to see who everyone's favorite loser is in Philly sports. We're into the second round now, so be sure to check that out. Check out the archives of this while you're sitting on the beach, driving to the beach, working out. Lots of good content on the Sixers, Eagles. We do some things on the Flyers, college basketball, college football. So just be sure to check that out. We have a lot of great things coming up on the horizon. I'm trying to set up more interviews. I'm working with things from the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. I have some things for football season with some Giants and Cowboys fans, sort of like I don't know, because I'm the only one with a mind. They're Giants and Cowboys fans, but a meeting of the minds. Maybe I'll meet with the mindless, so to speak. But be sure to just stay tuned, have some meetings and things coming up. Lots of good things on the horizon. Check me out on social media. YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Jimbo_Mont, Instagram at Philly Jimbo. Be sure to check out that link for Back to the Future specific link for 75% off of 2008 Phils. It's well worth it for the content, and they give you a free t-shirt. Check out our friends, like you heard at the beginning, at Philly Goat. Use that promo code for 10% off. Go have yourselves a week. I will be at the beach for a few days down in Ocean City, Maryland with the kids and the fam. Looking forward to it, but be safe. Enjoy your week. This has been Back to the Future. I'm Jim Montgomery. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.